In the blistering housing markets of southern Ontario, Toronto, but many other communities as well, one group that's often overlooked in the conversation is seniors. Some are living in houses that are too big and hard to maintain. Others can't find suitable and affordable stock that allows them to downsize. And others still need new services and amenities that their neighborhoods simply don't have. Here for more, Dr. Samir Sinha. He is Director of Geriatrics at Sinai Health System and the University Health Network. Zeina Khiat. Did I say that right?
That's right.
That's the nice Arabic pronunciation, right?
That's right.
Khiat. Okay. She is the future strategist for home care provider SE Health and adjunct professor of health sector strategy at the U of T's Rotman School of Management. And Cheryl Case is here. She's the founder and principal of the urban planning firm CP Planning. And it's good to have everybody around our table tonight for this discussion. I want to start with this. Zane, I'm going to go to you first. A recent CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Report, found that seniors are staying in their family-sized homes for longer. They are downsizing later than perhaps in earlier days. What are the implications, in your view, of that?
Yeah, so I don't think anyone will be surprised that older adults are staying longer in their family homes. A home is a feeling, and we all want to be home. I was reflecting when Bianca Andrescu arrived in Mississauga. She said, what do I want to do? I want to go to my bed and sleep in my bed. But the implications become multifold, and you mentioned a few of them in your opening. So first is sometimes because they're drawing a home and the community around that home, that housing might not be the most appropriate for their needs or for their finances. But what the CMHC report also shows is there are not other options available. And that's a lot of where now the policy discussions are going.
To find some options that are available.
In their community.
In their community. Cheryl, how would you answer that? The implications of people staying at home for longer?
Well, the implications of that is in the GTA, there are 5 million empty bedrooms. And what that means is not that the seniors, again, have to move out, but that does point again to the fact that, the housing supply isn't reflecting the needs of the population.
5 million empty bedrooms.
Yeah.
So this is a situation where kids have moved out, maybe, senior woman, widow is the last person there. She's staying in her original home, and there's 2 or 3 empty bedrooms where everybody else used to live. So that's really, do you think of that as wasted space in some respects?
I think it's a symptom of a system that is not responding to current needs. So in the cases where I've heard of people actually downsizing, they did that because they had options in their local neighborhood where they could do so, right? So where you're seeing households and seniors not downsizing, they don't have options to downsize in their local neighborhood, maintain those relationships with their community. So that's why they stay where they are, because why leave when you don't have to, and when leaving is not really even an option.
Is that right, Dr. Zena? Leaving just not an option for many of these people?
Well, I think it goes back to what Zena also said at the beginning, was that that home is not just the house that you live in, for example, but it's also your neighborhood, it's your community. And when you don't have those other options, for example, if there's not an apartment building, in your own neighborhood, for example, if there aren't other housing options, then why would I move out of my house and give up my neighborhood and my community? That store that I love to go to, my local church, other things in my community, maybe my community group, because in order to get the housing I need, it means I have to leave an entire community behind. And I think that's the problem. But, this report, it's like surprise, surprise, right? Life expectancy in Canada in 1900 was 51 years of age. It's now 82. And if you make it to 65, and most of us will, you'll have 20 years of good, life expectancy ahead of you. And that's something to celebrate. So yes, of course, if you're healthy and living longer, why would you need to move out of your house? But I think this is where we're blaming an issue about a lack of housing stock and now picking on this group, saying, how dare they live so long and successfully and choose to live in their homes longer? How dare they?
Well, some of the language does get a bit pejorative around this, and I note recently the Toronto Star, in reporting on this CMHC report, said seniors were, quote unquote, clinging to their homes, spelling doom for younger buyers who are trying to start families and get into the housing market in very expensive cities. What do you think of that kind of language?
Okay, with all respect, that's the most ageist headline I've seen, and we're going to have to keep calling these out. I think we have to understand as a society our own social constructs around what happens to older adults they're designed for what Samir talked about before, right? It was, you retired and within 5 years you were dead. And that's just not at all the case today. And so it's really an ageist perspective. And let's be clear, that's for the older adults who had the luxury of buying into the housing market in the first place. And that really doesn't describe kind of the broader need for affordable housing in people's communities to honor and respect their choice of where they want to live and age. We can't tell people where they want to live and age. They decide that for themselves, and we owe that to these people who've created Canada.
Although the implications are that people of your generation are going to have a harder time finding housing because of this. I'm not making a value judgment on it, but that is simply the case, right?
Well, I love my neighbor, and he's a very old man, and I would never use that language to a senior. I don't think, like you were saying, it's just disrespectful. And I think when we're talking about housing, you need to respect a person's choice to live on a property that, especially if they own it, if their property that they put money into, you have to respect that, and also respect their agency and their ability to think through what is the best decision for me right now. And so it really goes back to, again, the systems that are in place and the lack of options to even consider to move into a different situation. And I'll just to continue, speaking about the intergenerational relationships, I have spoken to friends of mine who, they grew up with their family and with their parents, and they wanted to, convert their house into 2 separate living units, and they could not do so.
Why not?
Policy does not permit for
Municipal bylaw stuff?
Yeah. So, for example, having a separate entrance to putting in a separate entrance to a house that otherwise did not have a separate entrance, you'll come up to issues on doing that in zoning bylaw policy. And so he's forced to, again, because in this culture we value our independence.
Yes.
Right? Like, I love my parents, I love my neighbors, but I don't want to have to go into the kitchen and see them in the living room, right? You want your own separate space. But converting your detached house into 2 separate dwelling units, you can maintain that relationship of being next to your family member, but being separate. That's why, for example, laneway houses is one of the solutions when we're talking about intergenerational relationships, where you can have, seniors living in the backyard property, or maybe living in the main property, but again, allowing for providing an opportunity for young and old to live on the same property.
There's already, it seems, lots of reasons for this intergenerational situation to be nasty. Younger people may think older people are, for a whole bunch of reasons, preventing their ability to get forward. How do we kind of bevel the edges of that to make sure that we lower the temperature on this intergenerational situation?
Yeah, well, I think, again, people, I think 2 years ago when the housing market was really, out of control, we decided to choose, we started to focus on foreigners and say it was those foreign buyers who were buying up property and pushing up the prices. Now, we're finding a different group to blame, right? So now we're going to go after seniors, for example. And I think this is where I think as Cheryl was saying before, these are systemic issues. If we don't have enough housing stock, if we don't have the right mix of housing in our neighborhoods, and give people a variety of options, then we're actually just perpetuating the problems that we knew would happen years ago. And I think there are opportunities here. One of the fastest growing households in Canada are multi-generational households. That's actually the fastest growing type of household that we have in Canada today. And that's where multiple generations, 3 or more generations, are choosing to live together and share a house, and maybe where there are opportunities to divide it or create separate spaces. That's one opportunity. So that's one way to, I guess, smooth the edges. But another interesting initiative that started a few years ago in Halton region, and then in Oshawa, Durham, and now in Toronto, it's a program, it's called home sharing. And it's the idea where you can have a person who wants to stay in their neighborhood and has 3 extra bedrooms who is actually able to say, hey, young person, why don't you come and live with me? You'll get a below market rate rent, for example, but I need you to help me with mowing the lawn or doing those other things. And the program was so successful as a pilot. Now the City of Toronto's made it a permanent program. And so it's an example of where now that young millennial, for example, can live downtown, for example, they can actually save money towards that house purchase that they want to make, and they get to be a part of a community that they might not have otherwise been able to be a part of because it was too expensive to buy into. So these are some of the ways that we're trying to be creative, but we need more options.
Do you think it's a problem, Zaina, if a widowed woman of, let's say, 85 years of age lives in a home with 3 empty bedrooms? Is that a problem?
So it depends on what your starting point is. If that widowed woman of 85 is living at home and doesn't have the means, because reminder, people are on fixed income once they get, kind of past retirement age and can't afford the heat for that home, the person to mow her lawn and remove the snow and the taxes and all that, but doesn't have other options, it is a problem. But it's not a problem of the woman, it's a problem of a system. If that woman needs help and she doesn't want to go to a long-term care facility or a nursing home, she physically needs a bit of help, but we have no other way, and so she's going to just go sit at the hospital, this ALC, alternative level of care, then that's a problem. And that's why some of these other creative solutions will allow her to age in the place of her choice, but be supported to live as independently, as safely as possible within her economic means.
I'm wondering, should society be looking at that person as saying, you've got way too much house for your needs and you're being a bit of a hog about it? Is that,
but it's not just for older people. I'm going to raise my hand, and say I have a spare bedroom. Right now, I'm not advertising that for anybody, but what I'm trying to say is that that woman that we're targeting right now, who might have 3 empty bedrooms, well, I should equally be to blame because I'm overhoused, and many people are overhoused. That's it's not just the older segment that's accounting for the 5 million empty bedrooms.
So stop picking on seniors.
Yeah, stop picking on seniors because it's not fair. But I think, as Zaina was saying, was that again, the idea is it's not a matter that's not the problem, but if that person isn't able, if we're not giving them the options to age in the place of their choice, that's a societal problem.
I want to read a little excerpt here. My pal John Michael McGrath, who writes on our website, tvo.org, had a column aptly titled, "Waiting for Baby Boomers to Die is Not Effective Housing Policy."
Oh, no.
And here's an excerpt from that. Sheldon, put this up if you would. In relation to Toronto, he writes, our timid attempts to make change through policy have done little to address the housing problem. The only thing governments of all stripes and at all levels are doing comprehensively is not enough. In light of the CMHC report that we've been talking about here, I would add that part of the reason nobody is doing enough is that we've been slow to recognize that certain features of the system, like mortality itself, aren't doing the same work they used to. Guy's clever, eh?
Yeah.
Writes clever stuff. Okay, people are living longer, but how would you like to see policy change? I don't know, City Hall. What should City Halls all over Ontario be doing to make sure that we can kind of line up what people have, what people need, et cetera?
I mean, I think as I've understood it, there's this macro movement of what we call age-friendly cities. And Samir's been involved in Toronto in particular. I mean, that is the policy they're going after, and it's multi-pronged. It's not just a housing solution. It's about the built environment and libraries and parks and the urban landscape. But it's designing to be an age-friendly city. And I think there's a fellow in Brazil who has a whole movement called 8 to 80. Which means you design a city that can work for an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old. And if you do that, we're not going to even have to have this panel today.
Because they kind of have the same needs, don't they? In some respects.
And you cover the multi-generational, et cetera. It's just part of the fabric of society and not this exceptional thing that there's suddenly a lot of older adults staying alive for much longer. It's just kind of how society is.
It's probably not good social policy to just wait for people to die off, right?
No, it hasn't worked really well for us because again, we started at 51 years of age back in 1900 and we're 82 and, chances, and apparently our lifespan could be 120. So really bad policy if we focus on that.
Yeah.
But policies that do work, again, in that framework of age-friendly communities, some of the work that the city planners are doing is they're saying if we're building a new neighborhood, let's have mixed types of accommodation. Let's have some detached homes with multiple bedrooms. Let's have single-story apartments or smaller apartments that people might want to downsize into and stay within their community. So it's looking at a mix of options as opposed to a neighborhood that just has detached houses and only one option available as well. But it's also making sure that we look at other creative programs, like as we're saying, do we have permission to divide up our houses, for example? Do we look at co-housing policies? Do we look at more home sharing programs? Because these are some of the creative things, but they're not mainstream policies. policies right now, but these are some of the ways that we need to advance, but we're not doing that as a concerted or cohesive effort across the province or even in the city itself.
Cheryl, there are cranes all over the skies of the capital city of this province, and a lot of them are condos. And I want to know, based on your experience, whether or not enough of these condos are being designed with seniors in mind.
Interesting. So are they being designed with seniors in mind? I think they'd actually be the better people to ask because they specialize in seniors. What I can talk about instead is the fact that a lot of the development is going up in the downtown area, and they're going up in other very centralized areas. They're not going out in other parts of the city, and that's a disservice to those parts of the city that do need actually to have their population increased. A lot of the city actually has lost population within even the last 15 years. You can go back 30 years and you see the same trend where neighborhoods have lost population. We've seen a loss therefore in services. So the people in those neighborhoods, they need services. So the seniors, for example, in those neighborhoods, when they were young, and they didn't have a care for services, they could drive to work and drive to fun and to play. Those things change when you're older. You need actually to be more accessible. When you're talking about 880, you need to have a diverse mix of people in your community that can actually reach out to you and connect with you. So for example, if you have a support worker who comes to visit you an hour a day, it'd be best if that person actually lived within your neighborhood or lived within close proximity. And that gets harder when we actually don't have density in these neighborhoods to support those people to live in those neighborhoods.
How about it, Zane? Are the condo developers in this city keeping seniors in mind as they build?
Yeah, I don't know, like on a macro, I don't know the statistics, but what I do know is we've been really encouraged by a lot of policy moves and just, developers who are actually in here for mission, where land is either available at low cost or free, or developer fees are waived if you do build for kind of a senior adaptable modality. And there's been a lot of those going up across the province and across the country. So really good incentives, municipal, provincial, and federal, including on the mortgage rates and all that stuff. So that's been encouraging because now you're building purpose-built, affordable, with all the things we've talked about, instead of just kind of letting the market take over.
What would a seniors-focused condo look like?
So there's lots of things. There's design principles that are universal for what would a building look like and achieve. But there's just things about physical, like the space and the size of the hallways. And as Samir talked about, the modular ability, the ability to adapt the space as people's needs evolve, whether they're physical needs or, let's say you need oxygen or those kinds of things. So we're seeing really neat innovation on the ability to switch and move things around as needs and the mix changes. And then again, as Cheryl said, just the design of services that wrap around the physical building. And I think in your report, Samir, you guys talk about these naturally occurring retirement communities. And that's just basically saying there happens to be a building with a fair share of older adults. How might the people self-organize their own services around to allow them to live and age as long as possible in place?
What does that look like?
Well, it looks like if you can develop a nice NORC, if you will, or this natural occurring retirement community, but the building has to be able to allow people to live there as long as they want to. And so, is the regular condo community, are they actually developing, being as accessible as they could in their design? Well, not when you look at townhouses or multi-level, homes, unless you have an elevator in it. But we're talking about single-story setups. We're talking about wide doorways, for example. So I remember when I moved into my place, I was really keen to make sure that the door widths were at least 32 inches wide because that's the international standard for wheelchairs and walkers. Because I plan to live in my place till I die, right? So I want to make sure it's flat. I want to make sure that there are wide access points so I can get around. But you also want to make sure that you're not crawling into a bathtub here, but you have easy access into showers and that. And those are universal design principles that work well at any age if you might be limited by function and some of those aspects. But then when you actually have buildings that are designed like that, then anybody can live at them at any level of functionality. If I break my leg now, my apartment is nice and accessible for me. If I later on have dementia, my apartment will still be pretty accessible to me. So that's what we talk about, good, universal, and design. But I think a lot of condo developers, or a lot of developers right now, they're not really thinking about, they might still be thinking more aesthetically pleasing as opposed to, but smart developers who are really thinking ahead are knowing that people are now looking more towards this and saying, I plan to live till I'm 82 or longer, therefore how do I make this work? And that's part of the process. And then on top of that, that's where we start looking at these ideas of how do we create communities that can be inclusive and that can support people, as they want to age in place.
I don't know, but do condo developers do things as simple as put railings in hallways for seniors where you wouldn't normally see them in other buildings?
No.
Not really, and I think partly because that would just not be aesthetically pleasing, and it also costs more, right? But for some of the seniors' purpose-built housing, they're putting that in. But again, there are other simple design features that I think some of the smart condo developers are now saying, because they're marketing to people who are thinking of living there for a long time, and I think those who actually market in that way and plan that way are going to be more successful in their work.
Cheryl, apropos of what you were saying earlier about it's against the rules to take a unit and cut it in half and with a side entrance. There's some municipal bylaws that would prohibit that. Do you think City Hall is yet adequately seized of the new reality of the situation, which is some of these old bylaws, which may be 50 or 75 years old, have got to be thrown out because they just don't make sense today?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited. Speaking specifically about the City of Toronto, Anna Bailão and John Tory have spoken about encouraging more missing middle development. So missing middle, something that I've written about in House Divided, a book that I recently published. There's so much that goes behind it, and so it sounds like Anna Bailão and John Tory.
She's a city councillor from downtown.
Yeah, she's fantastic. Okay, yes, Councillor Anna Bailão, yes. I guess people outside of the City of Toronto don't know Councillor Anna Bailão in this way, but Councillor Anna Bailão, she and John Tory are encouraging council to look into missing middle development. And so what missing middle is it's essentially allowing for a diverse mix of housing types. And actually it was just, I think this week that they announced in a competition actually to look into missing middle. So the City of Toronto is very excited and looking in that direction. And I have heard other cities as well looking into encouraging other housing types in the neighborhood. So,
because I gather some places duplexes and triplexes are not allowed.
yes.
Which you would think,
Yeah.
we might need more of that, given that we need to intensify, development.
Yeah.
Do they get that?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
They are getting it now.
Yeah. So in the City of Toronto, they've been fantastic, and it's happening. I think there's like the wave of understanding that this is a problem that needs to be addressed, and it's a problem that we've seen coming, and it's here. It's really here right now. So that's why you're seeing it actually being addressed. Sometimes how people work, you see something coming, you don't want to talk about it until it's in your face. So
Okay, follow up.
I think just we're not getting into policy, and there was an announcement of a certain election happening very soon.
Really? I didn't hear about that.
So I think it's well beyond cities and buildings and code, and I absolutely agree. I mean, I think macro, this is just everything else in society. A baby boomer, I think, was born every 10 seconds, and they all are starting to turn 75 this year. So the volume and the speed at which we're confronting this doesn't match the pace at which policies that were designed for 50 years ago are able to innovate. But it gets then into healthcare policy and a lot of other things. So, for example, in the U.S., if for somebody to age in place and live in their home as long as possible, beyond building codes, needs certain things in their house, whether that's the railing or the elevator or whatever, the healthcare system will pay for that, in Medicare and Medicaid in the U.S. Major policy innovation. So I think it now opens up a broader view of what is healthcare, right? If to be healthy,
Medicare will pay for like a seat elevator to go up the
you can claim for your home care,
Okay.
things that help you live and age as home as long as possible. Alberta was just here in May talking about they're now giving families their own budgets to pay for if getting your stairs cleaned of snow is going to keep you healthy at home and safe, that counts as a healthcare expense, right? So there's a lot of other policy innovations that can help enable people to live and age in place for as long as they want.
Samir, you were going to add.
Yeah, no, and I think part of this comes back to that, we think about the city of Toronto, but we think about all the municipalities across Ontario, and some of them have conflicting bylaws. Some of them say, yes, we will allow you to split your house. Others say we don't, and so on. So I do know that, right now the provincial government in Ontario is looking at passing this new act, this what they're calling the Golden Girls Act, which is kind of saying, how do we actually just get, actually, instead of having all these different municipal things where in this municipality you can, this municipality you can't, and actually saying what is an equitable policy that we can have that can allow people to have access to a different housing type. Because this is the problem where people want to actually do these things in their communities, but then they find out that, well, the community next door allows us and that one doesn't. So I think this is that opportunity where we can start thinking about how do we be more creative? How do we allow people support to renovate their places? How do we allow people to get the home and community supports they need to age in the place of their choice? And how do we have the mix of housing options available so that people can age in the community of their choice, but in the appropriate accommodation as well?
It's funny you mentioned that because earlier in this program we had one of the Golden Girls on talking about that very thing. She's one of 4 people in Port Perry, 4 women, not related, not a family, decided to buy a house together, and obviously lots of complications to be figured out, but they are figuring it out, and they've been together for 3 years right now. And I wonder if you think is that a one-off, or is that the wave of the future?
I think more and more people are getting excited about, home sharing, co-housing, co-buying. There's all these different kind of versions of ways. And I think the problem is when these 4 are trying to figure it out, I'm kind of like, what? Why are we making it so hard for these people who have made, no one's holding a gun to their head.
Well, the town initially fought them.
Well, this is it, right? And it's ridiculous because these are 4 people who are capable of making their own decisions. And we say, well, sorry, there's a municipal bylaw that says the 4 of you responsible tax-paying adults can't actually get in on your home together and live together. Like, that's ridiculous, right? So, this, and I think this is the challenge of why I think people are starting to say, well, at what level do we actually say, is this at a federal level? Is it a provincial level where we just stop the madness and allow people to get on with this? Because otherwise, then we get back to where we started, where we just say, okay, we blamed the foreigners last year. Now we're just going to blame the seniors. Next week we're going to be blaming the children for the housing crisis. I don't know how yet, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I will say, I think it is a little bit of a shiny object. So we get excited about these. They seem interesting, and you bring them on your show, and intergenerational, and they are happening. I think there will be a growing momentum, and we do want to unlock the policy barriers. But the groundswell, the overwhelming majority are older adults whose intention is to stay in their home and in their communities. And it's this mixed options of townhomes, single unit, affordable. To me, if I had to put where we should spend most of our energy, it's on that kind of that bulk and making those options, because that's going to have, honestly, the biggest bang for the buck.
Yeah.
We got just a few minutes left here, and you did this report on long-term care that we want to spend a little bit of time on here. Long-term care in Canada. Sheldon, you want to bring this graphic up, and I'll read it out loud for those listening on podcast. There are 430,000 adult Canadians that have unmet home care needs. 40,000 are on wait lists for nursing homes, and that's mostly due to lack of affordable care in their homes and communities. 63% of families say they worry that they couldn't care for older family members if they needed long-term care. And 58% of Canadians said they expected people will delay retirement to be able to afford better health care in their own homes. How well, Dr. Sinha, you've been on this for more than a decade. How well is Ontario delivering home care to people in the province right now?
Well, I think just even yesterday there was an announcement that the minister came out and said we're actually going to invest even more money than we planned to in home care because, hallway medicine is the worst it's been now, actually, that we've seen. And so all of a sudden we're realizing that why are people stuck in hospitals? Often it's because they don't have enough of the home and community care options they need. And again, those numbers speak to the national need. It's not just an Ontario issue, it's everywhere. But I think we're acutely seeing that if we don't have the right mix of home and community care, and the challenge is then, and that's government funded care, then people have to go to the private market, and that's not cheap. right? That can easily eat up
Actually,
your
that's
savings.
unbelievably expensive. Never
Exactly.
mind, it's not cheap. It's unbelievably expensive.
Well, and this is why people are saying, I expect to delay my retirement to buy the care because I'm afraid, seeing what mom and dad need, how am I going to afford that for myself? And so this is where you see those statistics. These are real numbers here where people are saying, this is a barrier. So what what our report really focused on is when we think about long-term care, some people traditionally think about nursing homes. But, as we were saying, people want to stay in their homes for as long as possible, but they don't want to be isolated and stuck there without the care and support they need. But if we provide more of the care and support they need, and if people stay in their homes longer, it actually saves us all more money as taxpayers, because a day of home care on average in Ontario, it's about $50, $60 a day. A day in a nursing home costs us $177 a day. So it's in our interest to actually, back to the beginning, have that person stay in their home, 3 bedrooms or 1, I don't care, because it's actually cheaper for all of us. But right now, too many Ontarians and too many Canadians are going without, enough home care.
Cheryl, there's an election campaign going on. I know that because Zaina told me so a few minutes ago. How do you get this on the radar screen?
I think it's going back to what was discussed here, which is that we need to have a better relationship with one another and with the land, right? So when you're talking about home sharing programs, that's having a better relationship with the senior and the young person who would be renting with them, and providing additional support for the maintenance of their house, and it's an exchange that's beneficial for both parties, right? The young person gets to live in a more affordable neighborhood. The older person has access to the service, and they can stay in their house. But then also a better relationship with the land. So the fact that we're having a housing problem is if we're not using the land properly to actually service our own needs, right? And the reason we're not servicing our own needs is because we're failing to acknowledge the capacity for the land to do that, and also the fact that other people have needs that can be serviced by that land. So to make it less, I guess, broad picture, if you go back in the 70s, using a City of Toronto example, women weren't allowed to actually rent together. Like they actually had a definition for what a family is, and women were being actually fined by the city and saying you cannot live here because you're not a family. This failed to acknowledge that women were paid less. They had to live together to afford the property. So it's a lack of acknowledging of the lived experience of individuals and using land to service individuals. So and in a healthy way. So I think that's really what we need to get at, is how do we have a better relationship with each other and respecting our needs, and also with the land, so the land can better respect and service our needs.
A nice place to end it.
Yeah.
Thanks to the three of you for coming into TVO tonight and helping us out with this discussion. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.